This is the story of a pair of lovers and killers from England who dedicated their lives to murdering children. Working as a team, the lovers would lure them to a deserted place and then subject them to hellish torment. Even after their arrest, the criminals found ways to torment teenagers, and prominent British politicians tried to secure their release. Meet Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Ian Brady was born on January 2, 1938, in the Scottish city of Glasgow. His mother, Margaret Stewart, was a waitress. As for his father, his identity is not definitively known. According to his mother, he was a local journalist who died 3 months before his son's birth. Realizing that she couldn't cope with raising a child alone, Margaret gave the 3-month-old Ian to the Sloane family. They had 4 children of their own, but they accepted the boy. Ian took their surname but continued to see his mother regularly. At the age of 9, he moved to the town of Pollock, where he enrolled in the local school. From a very early age, those who knew him noticed Ian's cruelty to animals. They would later describe the terrible things the child did. At school, his behavior only worsened. He broke into other people's homes twice, for which he was caught by the police. Alas, the future killer received no serious punishment due to his age. Furthermore, he constantly bullied younger children. At 15, he left school and got a job as a waiter in a tea house. After working there for less than a year, the young man changed his line of work and became a butcher's delivery boy. At 16, he ended up in court again. His girlfriend, Evelyn Grant, had gone to a dance with another boy, for which Ian threatened her with a knife. The judge gave him probation on one condition. The young man had to live with his biological mother. After moving to Manchester to live with his mother and her new husband, Patrick Brady, the future killer, as you might have guessed, took his stepfather's surname. His stepfather got him a job as a fruit porter at the market. However, hard labor was not to Ian's liking. A year after moving, he was caught by the police for stealing a bag of lead seals. The young man intended to sell them on the black market to make some money. However, instead of money, he earned his first real prison sentence. Given that he was 17 at the time of the crime, the judge sentenced Ian to 2 years in a juvenile detention center. While serving his sentence, the young man managed to obtain alcohol in prison and get very drunk. For this, he was transferred to a stricter facility, where he completed his sentence on November 14, 1953. Returning to Manchester, Ian changed jobs twice, but he was drawn to something more. Deciding to further his education, he began to read books. All of these books were useful. One of his favorite works was Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. He also enjoyed books about Nazi crimes. Myra Hindley. Myra Hindley was born 4 years after Ian, on July 23, 1942, in a district of Manchester. Her family could hardly be called ideal. Her alcoholic father beat even her mother, and they lived in a dilapidated house where only one room was more or less safe. After her parents had another daughter, Myra was sent to live with her grandmother. Her father taught the girl self-defense in a rather brutal manner. He demanded that his daughter be able to fight back against any bully and did not tolerate weakness. He once forced her to beat up a neighborhood boy who had scratched her face. Later, the killer would call this incident her first victory. A shock in the girl's youth was the death of her close friend, 13-year-old Michael Higgs. He had once asked her to go swimming in a local abandoned reservoir, but she refused. The boy ended up drowning, and Myra felt guilty. After this incident, the girl began to gradually immerse herself in religion. She joined the local church parish and became the godmother to Higgs's nephew. At 16, the girl got a job as a clerk in a small firm. Her duties were basic: making coffee, fetching things, printing documents. Despite this, she won the affection of her colleagues from the very first days. After receiving her first paycheck, Myra spent it all in a week, leaving herself with no money to live on. Her colleagues then pooled their money and gave her the same amount from their own pockets. Around the same time, The young woman was planning to get engaged to her boyfriend, Ronnie Sinclair. At 17, she changed jobs, but Myra did not show the same enthusiasm at her new job. 6 months later, she was fired for constant absenteeism. At the same time, Myra attended a judo club, where even the boys didn't dare to fight her. Getting a taste for it, she might not stop in time and could cause serious injuries to her opponents. Around this time, Myra dyed her hair pink. The future killers met at the company Millwards, where they both got jobs. Myra was 19 at the time, and Ian was 23. According to the young woman's diary, their first conversation took place on July 27, 1961. Initially, Myra was attracted to the young man despite his criminal record, but she later lost interest. However, 6 months after they met, Ian asked her to the movies, and she agreed. The choice of film for their first date was as strange as could be, a documentary about the Nuremberg trials. This is what they bonded over. The couple continued to go to the movies to see the most violent films, and Brady soon instilled in Myra a persistent interest in the Nazis. They would often sit together, drinking German wine while reading materials and books about the atrocities of the Third Reich. Due to her new fascination, Myra began to imitate the ideal of an Aryan woman. She dyed her hair white and started wearing red lipstick. Later, she drastically changed her style of dress to be more revealing: short skirts, leather jackets, and high-heeled shoes. The couple continued to work together, but with each passing day, they paid less and less attention to their colleagues. Their relationship during that period could not be called ideal. In a letter to an old friend, Myra once wrote that Ian had slipped her sleeping pills. A few months later, she no longer paid that letter any mind. Given that the couple had little money in those years, they began looking for ways to get rich quick. Eventually, Ian and Myra decided to rob a bank. The young woman rented a van and tried to learn how to shoot, but she failed to master the skill. Despite this, she eventually acquired a rifle and 2 revolvers. In the end, the couple decided to abandon this idea, realizing that they would not succeed without proper skill and experience. Instead, they became seriously interested in photography and bought professional equipment. However, they mostly only photographed each other, and not in the most decent manner. 2 years after they met, in June 1963, Ian came to live with Myra and her grandmother. A little later, they were given new housing. For the first time, Brady voiced his secret dream to Myra: to commit the perfect murder. He was inspired by the book Compulsion by Meyer Levin, in which 2 teenagers planned to kill a 12-year-old boy and escape the death penalty. This revelation did not faze the young woman, and she agreed to help her lover. The plan was extremely simple. Myra and Ian would look for a victim along a road and then kill them. Brady told Myra to drive the van down the street alone, while he would follow her on a motorcycle. Upon spotting a suitable victim, the killer intended to signal to persuade the victim to get into the car. On the evening of July 12th, just a month after moving, they went out on the hunt. Brady chose the first victim and gave Myra the signal, but she drove past. Without explanation, Myra said that the killer's target had been 7-year-old Mary Wright, who lived next door to Myra's mother. In Myra's opinion, it would have been extremely difficult for them to get away with it, as the police would immediately begin searching for such a young child. After that, the couple continued down the street, looking for a new victim. At 8 p.m. on Froxmer Street, Brady made his choice again. Myra recognized the girl. It was Pauline Reed, the 16-year-old friend of her younger sister, who was on her way to a disco. Deciding to act, Myra stopped and offered her a ride, and the girl got into the car. To get her to a deserted place, Myra made up a story. She had supposedly lost a very expensive glove on Saddleworth Moor. This area was popular with locals for its rich peat deposits, used as fertilizer. The unfortunate Pauline agreed to help. Shortly after arriving at the location, Brady drove up to them. Myra told the girl that this was her boyfriend, and he would help them search. How the situation unfolded from there is not entirely clear. The problem is that Brady and Myra told two different versions of the story, but the outcome was the same. Pauline was killed. According to Ian's version, he and his lover sexually assaulted the girl and then killed her. Myra, however, claimed that she stayed in the car while Pauline and Brady went off to supposedly look for the glove. After some time, the killer returned alone and announced that the girl was dead. He led Myra to her body, where she noticed that the girl's clothes were heavily rumpled. In my opinion, Myra's version makes no sense. Under what pretext would a 16-year-old girl go searching with a man she didn't know, while Myra herself sat in the car? Most likely, with this story, the killer was merely trying to absolve herself of responsibility for direct participation in the murder. After burying the body, Myra and Brady loaded the motorcycle into the van and drove home. On the way, they saw Pauline's mother and brother searching for the girl. After a break of almost half a year, the couple decided to act again. But this time, their choice fell upon a 12-year-old boy. Noticing him on the road, they offered the child a ride home. As an additional incentive, Brady offered the boy a drink. After getting in the car, he clarified that they would need to stop by their house for the alcohol. But first, the pair of killers asked the child to help them find the fictional glove on Saddleworth Moor. To his misfortune, the boy agreed. What happened next? The situation unfolded according to the same scenario. Hindley claimed that Brady led the child away from the car, assaulted, and killed him. The killer once again stated that she was not present for any of it. 10 months later, the couple similarly abducted 12-year-old Keith Bennett as he was heading to his grandmother's house. The same fate awaited him: assault and murder. The police, who at that point did not yet suspect the existence of serial killers, initially arrested the boy's stepfather, but found no evidence against him. The killers committed their next murder 6 months later, on December 26, 1964. It is not entirely clear whether they maintained this cycle unintentionally, or if the pause was necessary to lull the police's vigilance. You have to agree, if children started disappearing one after another in a relatively small city, law enforcement would throw all their resources into catching the killer. But let's return to December 26 of that year. With only a few days left until New Year and Christmas, Ian and Myra decided to prepare another unpleasant gift for their city. This time, the scenario changed drastically. They spotted their new victim, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, at a fairground. She was attacked as soon as she stepped through the door of their home. The pair tormented the unfortunate child for a long time. When they had their fill, the sadist killed her and took the body to Saddleworth Moor. And again, Myra insisted she was not present at the murder. The attentive reader will remember that the couple lived with Myra's grandmother. So, where was she during all these atrocities? Early on the morning of the murder, the caring granddaughter sent her to a relative's house and forbade her to return home. Despite this, the old woman tried to return in the evening, but Myra simply wouldn't let her in. After dealing with the girl's body and cleaning the house, she finally brought her grandmother back. The couple committed the next murder 10 months later, breaking their peculiar cycle. But that's not the only thing that makes this case special. By that time, Myra's younger sister Maureen had a husband, 17-year-old David Smith. The two couples often spent time together. Secondly, Smith had already appeared on the police radar multiple times. just like Ian in his youth. Even their crimes were very similar. Smith was caught for breaking and entering and for assault. Perhaps Brady saw in him a new member for his impromptu gang. Over time, Smith began to visit their house, where, during long conversations with Ian, talk of murder began to surface. It got to the point where Myra began to seriously worry if their relative would run to the police. But Brady was adamant. He considered Smith one of us and trusted him. Shortly before the next crime, he even told her that he and Smith would soon commit a crime together. It all happened on the evening of October 6, 1965. Ian and Myra went to Manchester's Central Station to find a new victim. And soon Ian made his choice. He met 17-year-old Edward Evans, who agreed to go home with him. After a short conversation upon arriving at the house, the group drank some wine. At a certain point, Brady sent Myra to get Smith. After his arrival, events began to unfold rapidly. Myra went to the kitchen to feed the dogs. Smith remained in the living room. A few minutes later, she heard screams and the sounds of a struggle. Entering the room, she saw Evans and Brady fighting. After a brief fight, Ian grabbed an axe and struck the victim several times with the blunt side. He then threw an electrical cord around the unconscious Evans's neck and strangled him. After the deed, Brady wanted to take the body to the morgue immediately, but it was too heavy, and he had also injured his leg during the fight. In the end, he decided to leave it in the house and go to Saddleworth Moor with Smith the next day. He asked Smith to stay to feel the full weight of the deed. At first, Smith agreed to help Brady get rid of the body. Perhaps he was too frightened to refuse. With a short list of minor legal offenses, the young man turned to his wife, Myra's sister, for advice. After listening, she begged him to report this horror to the police. Smith listened to her, and at 6 a.m., he called the police from a nearby phone booth. His account differed slightly from what Myra would later say. The police archives contain an exact transcript of this call. Brady opened the door and said in a loud voice, "Myra, the buns and drinks," and then said, "We need the other stuff too." When I entered the house, the living room door was closed. Ian went into the living room, and I waited in the kitchen. I waited for a minute or two, and then I suddenly heard a wild scream, like a woman screaming, a very high-pitched voice. Then the screams continued one after another. Dave, help him!" Very loud. When I ran in, I just stood in the living room and saw a young lad. He was lying with his head and shoulders on the sofa, and his legs were on the floor. He was face up. Ian was standing over him, facing him. The lad was still screaming. Ian had an axe in his hand. He was holding it over his head, and he hit the lad on the left side of his head with the axe. I heard the thud. It was a terribly hard blow. A dreadful sound. Even though Smith recounted all this in a normal, monotonous voice, the abundance of detail made the police take the call with the utmost seriousness. They decided to act carefully to get into the house without a court order. A police officer drove to the location and lay in wait for the local baker who delivered bread in the mornings. Putting on the baker's apron, he took a couple of loaves from him and knocked on the killer's door. An unsuspecting Myra opened it. The police officer then quickly entered the house, where he found Brady. He was writing an explanatory note for work, asking for a day off due to an injury. The officer told a fabricated story about investigating incidents involving firearms and asked to inspect the house. It's unclear why Myra agreed. He searched all the rooms except for one, the one where the young man's body lay. According to Brady, it contained his work-related belongings. Naturally, this story inspired no trust. The officer offered to drive the woman to her workplace to get the key, but she gave in and opened the door. Upon the discovery of the body, Brady was immediately arrested. Before leaving the house, he told the policeman that a quarrel had occurred between him and Evans, trying to portray it as self-defense. During interrogation, he continued to stick to this version, but it sounded extremely unconvincing. Brady supposedly met Evans in a bar. A conflict started between them. The young man somehow ended up at his house, where the fight took place. At the same time, Smith was also giving testimony against Brady, and the police believed his side much more. Later, Ian would insist that Smith had taken a direct part in the murder. The young man described how Ian had boasted about killing 3 or 4 children, and even gave the approximate location of their burial. Furthermore, he told of the killers having 2 suitcases of evidence, in which they kept various trophies. The problem was that these suitcases were stored in some unknown, lost and found office in Manchester. It took the police several days to find them. The arrest of the killers was followed by a search of their home. There, many interesting finds awaited the police. Notebooks, lists of names, full-length photographs of Brady and Myra, as well as their explicit pictures. The notebooks contained coded words that the police were able to quickly decipher. It turned out that Brady kept a record of burial sites, weapons, and methods of murder. Alas, it was impossible to establish the exact location of all the victims based on this information, as it was quite superficial. Another book contained a list of names, among which were the names of other children. With all this information, investigators interrogated Brady again. His story was once again very weak. He claimed the lists contained the names of his friends and that he was joking when he talked to Smith about killing children. At the same time, the police managed to find the suitcases, the contents of which sent everyone into shock. They contained photographs of a naked girl, her mouth bound with a scarf. They also found audio cassettes, one of which would soon become perhaps the most horrific piece of evidence, 13 minutes long. Other cassettes contained recordings of Nazi plays. This girl turned out to be Leslie Ann Downey, killed by the murderers on December 26th. After listening to the tape, her mother recognized her daughter's voice. It is terrifying to imagine how difficult those 13 minutes were for the poor woman. In addition, the suitcases contained many photographs taken against the backdrop of the marshland, various clubs and whips, as well as erotic magazines. All of this, including the recording of the girl's screams and her photographs, would have been enough to press charges, but the police still had to search Saddleworth more. They faced a difficult task to determine the burial sites of the victims from numerous photographs. In this, they were also helped by Myra's 12-year-old neighbor, who had once gone with them to the moor to collect peat. For some unknown reason, the killers had left the girl alive. Perhaps the guilt of Myra and Brady would have been obvious in that case. 150 officers were involved in the search for the bodies on the moors. Initially, they focused on the area near the A628 highway. But later, based on witness testimony, they moved to the A635 highway. There, their first discovery awaited them. On October 10th, police officers noticed a hand sticking out of the ground. Due to the degree of decomposition of the body, the child's identity could only be established after an examination. She turned out to be the same girl from the sinister cassette, Leslie Ann Downey. 11 days later, the police discovered the body of John Kilbride. Simultaneously, Brady and Myra were charged with the murders of Leslie and John. Brady continued to spin unconvincing tales in an attempt to avoid punishment. When asked about the origin of the naked photographs of the little girl taken in Hindley's house, he did not deny taking them. However, he insisted that 2 men had brought the girl to their house and then taken her away in an unknown direction. Due to the onset of winter, the police temporarily halted the searches on the moors, but an almost open and shut case had already been built against Myra and Brady. On April 19, 1966, one of the most high-profile trials in British history began. Both lovers were charged with the murders of Edward Evans, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride. The turning point was the recording of little Leslie's last words. As part of the case, it was played from the first second to the last. The journalist present at the hearing called the tape the most horrific piece of evidence on the judge's table. The trial lasted more than 2 weeks, and on May 6, the court found the killers guilty, sentencing them to life imprisonment in different prisons. It was the last day they ever saw each other. The pair maintained an active correspondence, but over the years, their fervor faded, and the letters became less frequent. The trial was memorable for another interesting detail. David Smith, who was the chief witness, signed a contract with a local newspaper, obligating him to give an exclusive interview if Myra and Brady were convicted. For this, the publication paid him £1,000, which was a very substantial sum for the time. Smith and his wife spent the money on a vacation at a 5-star French hotel, which drew the judge's indignation. He considered such a deal inappropriate, but could do nothing about it within the law. From that point on, the story of Myra and Brady split into 2 separate lines. But it was not over. By 1974, Ian had been moved through several prisons before finally staying put. And that's when the most interesting part began. The killer managed to assault children while incarcerated. How was this possible? Shortly after being transferred to Parkhurst Prison, Brady, who was placed in solitary confinement, declared a hunger strike. He was unhappy with the ban on communicating with other prisoners. The prison administration did not want to make concessions, and as a result of his sharp weight loss, the killer was moved to the hospital wing, where his life took on a new vibrancy. He was allowed to watch television and perform cleaning duties. At the same time, teenage criminals with mental disorders were admitted to the prison's hospital wing. In 1981, one of these teenagers reported that Brady had forced him into sexual contact. Later, similar statements from victims began to come in regularly. Using his access to secluded corners of the prison as a cleaner, Ian would lead his victims there. When the prison authorities found out, he was forbidden from cleaning, but no additional charges were filed. What's more interesting is that he was left in the hospital wing, next to the same teenagers. It would seem impossible, but the prison's chief medical officer was obligated to provide care to prisoners, and Brady skillfully used this. He threatened to resume his hunger strike every time there was talk of transferring him back to a cell. In 1982, a firm decision was made to move the killer to another prison with stricter conditions. However, just 3 years later, in 1985, Brady was declared legally insane. Thanks to this, he received another transfer to Ashworth High Security Psychiatric Hospital. Many of you might wonder how such a cruel sadist managed not only to create a comfortable life in prison, but also to carry on his dirty deeds with teenagers. The answer may surprise you. Helping him secure concessions and privileges was the Earl of Longford, Frank Pakenham, one of the leading politicians of the time. Brady reached out to him from prison, and soon, the Earl had effectively taken his side. Of course, there was no question of helping to get the charges dropped, but Ian wasn't counting on that. Pakenham helped him stay in the hospital by appealing to the British Home Secretary himself. After that, the politician repeatedly helped out his new friend by pulling the right strings in the English establishment. But he could not grant Brady's main request. The killer dreamed of a meeting with Myra. On that note, let's go back a bit to Hindley's story. Her life behind bars was far less eventful, but not without its interesting moments. In prison, she managed to start a relationship with a lover. But more interestingly, she managed to get out for a time. Sometime after her sentence began, Hindley started a stormy affair with a prison guard, Patricia Cairns. Together, they planned an escape but were caught by the police during the preparation stage. As a result, Cairns went from being a prison employee to a prisoner for 6 years. In November 1986, Keith Bennett's mother wrote a letter to Myra, begging her to reveal her son's fate. It was filled with pain and despair, which is clearly visible in the last lines. I am a simple woman. I work in the kitchens at Christie Hospital. It has taken me 5 weeks to write this letter to you because it is so important to me that it is accepted by you as it is meant to be. A plea for help. Please, Miss Hindley, help me. It's impossible to say for sure whether this touched Hindley or if there were other motives, but she agreed to participate in a police reconstruction. Under heavy guard, she was taken to Saddleworth Moor, which was cordoned off by 200 police officers. Myra's task was to point out the location of the bodies. However, unfortunately, the search yielded no results. The detectives who organized her participation were sharply criticized for the senseless waste of money on such a large-scale event. Nevertheless, it bore fruit a little later. One of the detectives continued to visit the woman in prison, and soon she decided to partially confess to a number of crimes. Myra spoke about all the murders, but insisted she was never there at the time. Of course, no one was in a hurry to believe this, but the detective was glad to get any new information.
Since then, Myra went out to the moor several more times, and in 1987 the police had success. If the discovery of the bodies of first Pauline Reed and then Leslie Ann Downey can be called that. As soon as Brady learned of his former lover's cooperation with the investigation, he also decided to partially confess to his deeds, though he asked for the means and opportunity to end his life, which no one could legally provide. After being refused, Ian finally began to talk, and also expressed a desire to help the police find the remaining bodies. On July 3rd of that year, he was taken to Saddleworth, where he was unable to point out Keith Bennett's burial place. Later, disappointed detectives refused a repeat trip to the moor with the killer, and he turned to journalists. In a letter, he indirectly admitted to killing 5 more children, but the police were unable to confirm this information. 6 months later, Brady managed to secure a second trip to Saddleworth, but was again useless. Keith's body has not been found to this day. In 2003, the police resumed the search, using the most advanced technologies. It produced no results. All they had were 40-year-old photos, on the basis of which finding the right spot is practically impossible. Myra tried for a long time to achieve early release, writing appeals with the support of Lord Longford, and by the early 2000s, almost everyone was sure her release was inevitable. Unfortunately for her, life decided otherwise. Hindley died on November 15, 2002, at the age of 60. The cause was complications from heart disease. The rest of Brady's life turned out to be less rosy. While the question of Myra's release was seriously considered, top British officials put a firm stop to any notion of Ian leaving the hospital. With each year in the psychiatric hospital, he gradually lost his mind until he lost all remnants of sanity, if he ever had any. Despite this, he managed to live for quite a long time, to the age of 79. In 2017, the killer died of cancer, and the urn with his ashes was submerged at the bottom of the sea. Brady's death made few people sad. His namesake, the chairman of the Police Federation branch, Ian Hansen, noted that such monsters do not deserve sympathy. Here the story of the child-murdering lovers ended, but in Britain, their names will long remain in people's memory. Ian and Myra are a vivid example of inhumanity, boundless audacity and cynicism, and a complete absence of morality.
Subscribe to the channel to listen to these real and scary stories. Sometimes these stories end well, but more often badly. It's disturbing.